Now usually, I'm not the biggest fan of snakes. Actually, who am I kidding? I'm not a fan of snakes at all. But for you, we might be able to make some arrangements. I bring to you the best and most voluptuous snake, MEDUSA. We're going to be going over her 3 main forms, from baby Dusa all the way up to her more demonic form, Gorgon. First up, we have MEDUSA Lily, otherwise known as Anna. Now in this form specifically, she has a lot of her divine power sealed off to a certain threshold. Her parameters are admittedly all over the place, which by normal standards wouldn't make her too much stronger than the average servant. Thanks to the fact that she has access to her mystic eyes as well as the heart phantasm, you can still say in some scenarios she's still slightly above average. Back when we were fighting during Grand Order, Kingu himself said that she was mediocre in terms of overall power, but this isn't saying too much considering that he's also in the body of one of the strongest servants there is. Her noble phantasm is the same harp that belonged to the hero Perseus, a power that can strip immortality from the greatest of beings. Later on in the chapter, you even see her do this with her future self when facing off against Gorgon. Unfortunately, Anna is a character that doesn't get too many good looks in the chapter. She doesn't even get to use her main phantasm, which is basically Bellerophon Jr., because the story never really required her to do so. And though the fight against Gorgon was more of a team battle, so it's hard to give her the proper credit, you can tell that the skill is present, if nothing else. Now heading off over into MEDUSA, the character that everybody enjoys and is most familiar with, is a lot more capable than her younger form. If you look at her parameters from her Grand Order palette, it gives us a way more accurate idea of what her stats will be overall if she had a proper master. In terms of strength, MEDUSA would make a massive jump from D rank all the way to B. Couple this with the fact that she gains access to the skill Monstrous Strength, and she can technically make her strength A rank for short periods of time. As you can clearly see, her power increases dramatically. First point that we have to address is Shinji holding back Ryder's true power. If you look at the Fate route, UB-Dub, and even up to halfway of Heaven's Field, Ryder's output is mitigated due to the lack of a proper master, and she still pulls off a lot of feats regardless. Living up to her class name, she was able to summon the legendary divine beast Pegasus clocking in at half Mach travel speeds on his own. Saber herself mentions that his defense alone is on the level of the dragon race, and taking a hit from this beast is just like taking a hit from a castle wall. Ryder having direct access to this since she mounts him during the fight. In Heaven's Field, she was able to use this beast to completely immobilize a Grail boosted Salter with the help of Shiro. And while we're on this fight, one thing that was huge and that's often glossed over is that 90% of Bellerophon's light was offset by Salter's sword. This means that only 10% of her phantasm hit Saber head on, and it still completely immobilized her. So you can just imagine how powerful this would be if she was hit by the actual thing. Going over into her speed. When it comes to speed, Ryder is one of the fastest servants out there. Numerous times throughout the story, you can see her agility being boasted by Shiro and the other characters, clashing at near Mach speed with Saber in the Fate route. In the fight against Ryder's weakened version, Saber still didn't bother chasing her down because she already knew that speed was not the department that she wanted to go against. The story openly admits that she couldn't keep up, instantly disappearing from Shiro's line of sight and pulling off nearly impossible evasions with several meters to spare. Considering that Saber was only C agility under Shiro, and Ryder is 2 ranks ahead of her, it's safe to say that she's at least Mach 1 or Mach 2 in terms of reaction speed. But another thing that we have to take into account is back when Saber was dodging bullets in Fate Zero. Keep in mind that she was doing this with an agility of rank B. Now granted, Medusa doesn't have access to the instinct skill, nor does she have access to Mana Burst to increase her speed. But during Heaven's Feel, while Sakura was her master, her speed was ranked at A+. This means that even if you lowball her, you have to give her around Mach 3 in terms of reaction speed. This is really just scratching the surface if you think about her fight with Hassan, where it was stated that Ryder was moving so fast that it appeared as if she was attacking from all sides. Hassan couldn't even touch her at point blank range in an enclosed area with his projectiles. Her other assets include her Phantasm Blood Fort, which gives us a more magnified perspective of her mystic eyes. It's even said that this Phantasm is nearly on the level of true magic. People that lack a certain quality of magic resistance will often get their bodies flat out dissolved, and all the energy that she siphons will go straight back to her and her master. Looking at the interactions between her and Archer in Heaven's Field, where Archer jumped off into the school having to deal with her bounded field. This left Archer in an extremely weakened state, and because of this, she was able to capture him with her most effective move, her Mystic Eyes of Petrification. This might leave her opponent frozen in place, or in the worst case scenario, if you don't have the mana to restrict these, she might flat out turn your body into stone. Word to her original lore. In any route that Shiro entered her blood fort, he always mentions a gut-wrenching pain due to the sheer lack of oxygen. On a realistic level, she's hardly going to be able to pull off blood fort in regular circumstances due to the fact that it takes so long to set up, as we've seen is a minimum of several days. But in the event that she does get the opportunity, it can and it will be devastating, slowly sapping away the majority of a servant's power and putting any low-level master in a place where they could hardly provide any good assistance. She can also drain the life force by drinking it out of somebody's body directly. Mainly, this is just the story giving a nod to her snake-like characteristics. Going off into her durability, Medusa is shown to take on a decent amount of damage before you can actually bring her down. Considering the fact that she was under Sakura, it's kind of hard to identify how durable she actually is if we're going to base it off Heaven's Feel, since technically she was pulling her energy from the same source as Salter minus the Grail manipulations. She had a full-blown death match with Saber, yet her endurance is D rank, and then still had enough energy to come back and save Sakura unscathed. So under normal circumstances, you can imagine her durability would be at least average. Even when she stated she would only last 2 minutes against Salter, she managed to last more than 10. This may not sound like a big deal, but these fights can happen in an instant. Keep in mind that Heracles, who is infinitely stronger than Medusa, was barely able to last that long between his lives. So the fact that she was able to survive that long is something that kind of speaks for itself. Then we have her skills and her adaptability. You have multiple scenarios where Medusa is making the absolute best of the tools that she has, forcing Saber into a battle that's more friendly to her nature, using her scaling techniques to give herself the upper hand, taking advantage of her unmet speed to offset the power gap between her and Salter, carefully weaving in her mystic eyes while she's mid-air, by the way, as a means to slow down Salter, using her scaling ability to prep for an assault or gather information at the temple gates, using her mystic eyes to petrify Emiya even though he should be better than her in close combat. Several different ways that she can pull the strings in her favor. Her style of combat is often using her speed and her surroundings to create a balance against whatever her opponent might bring. Her chains can be manipulated to her desire, seeing as she was able to trap Shuro when she was lurking in the forest, and in addition to this, they also make for a great tool to incorporate lasso techniques. This is something that's best noted by Hassan getting spin cycled against the wall when they were in the temple. Not to mention her doing the same thing to Kingu as Anna at the beginning of Babylonia. And finally, but not least of course, we have Gorgon, the pinnacle of Medusa's overall power, who also shows up in Babylonia, standing in at a ferocious 328 feet tall. This is not the form that you want to go against. From the time that she shows up in the chapter, her movements alone are enough to destroy several buildings that were around her. The sheer level of vibration that her movements make left the servant Benkei to believe that there must have been some type of earthquake. This is the sound of Medusa moving devious, using her own snake hairs as projectiles that are strong enough to leave giant crevices in the ground. In the chapter, one swipe of her tail alone was enough to obliterate every man on their front line. Her parameters are ridiculously high, as they should be, and her mystic eyes were enough to freeze Merlin, who is a grand candidate of Magecraft himself. Now, during the chapters, her powers were altered due to the effects of the Grail, but this largely had a lot more to do with how much energy she had and her ability to regenerate. For the most part, what you see is still the real deal. She even says this herself when we assume that the Grail was affecting her true power. Her mystic eyes in this form is able to one-shot Leonidas and all of his men who operate as literal pseudo-servants were getting clapped on the side. She dusted them all, Ushiwakamaru. While she did gain the upper hand because of her speed, she wasn't able to lay a scratch on Gorgon with her best phantasm. The noble phantasm Pandemonium is what replaces her original Blood Fort. This phantasm was strong enough to damage the nearly impenetrable Mother Goddess Tiamat, an incredible feat in its own right, considering that Tiamat is often touted to be borderline immortal herself. And of course, in the chapter, she had several thousand demonic beasts at her disposal, but again, this was just another Grail manipulation, nothing that she would have normally. And then you have her actual Blood Fort, the Bounded Field, now being a physical location that bolsters her powers tremendously. Excluding the demonic beast, it took the divine axe of Marduk being lodged into this temple just to slow her down. Now on the side, we can look at her Lancer variant from early FGO, though it is just a shadow copy and it's not really anything effective to measure its actual power. At best, you could say that this class would just be a grown version of Anna with less restrictions. This too having access to the Heart Phantasm and a greater ability to manipulate her chains, creating chain-based barriers as well as using them as convenient projectiles. Lastly, we have her downsides, which really just depends on the form that she's given. While her tactics are still sharp, Anna's regular power isn't anything too impressive. Without using Bellerophon, she was getting absolutely destroyed by Jaguar Man during the story. If you bump this up to her Ryder form, you're gonna see a lot more versatility and a lot more strength. She was able to make a complete mockery of Hassan, who up until that point had trashed everybody that was in the route. However, when she's up against higher tier servants such as Salter, she only has a certain amount of time before the power gap will catch up to her. And as far as Gorgon goes, she does trade off some of her versatility and her speed for power and size. Personally, I do still think Gorgon has a lot of versatility in her own right, so while the trade-off does matter, it's not nearly as steep as it might seem. If I had to scale each form, I would give them C, B, and then of course A respectfully, each one having their own favorable reasons that give her another jump in power. Overall, MEDUSA has shown us several angles on how strong her character can actually be, and she's also shown us several other angles, and I can't say that I'm mad at that. Most of this naturally being a direct result of the position that she decides to play in the story. Regardless of wherever she might fall, it's pretty obvious that even in her lowest form, she can still out the average servant on certain occasions, and in her highest form, she would definitely be brought into the conversation of the elites. Let me know what you guys think. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Shout out to all the patrons, and I will be back with more Tight Moon content. It is your boy Tsiah. I'm out.